Welcome to another special episode of the Hedgehog Watchdog. I'm Greg Baldwin, joined by with Devin Saxon as always, and special guest Adam Jewell, returning for another episode where we're going to stream the debates tonight. It's the U.S. House debate. Libertarian candidate Collin Duprel versus incumbent Dusty Johnson. This will be a good one, I think, guys. What do you think?
I think Colin's gonna kick his ass, metaphorically speaking.
I mean, that'd be pretty crazy if he did it like literally. It'd be like the craziest debate in I don't know, almost U.S. history, just about.
Collin Duprel comes out with a steel chair immediately.
Boom! My God, it's a chair. I think we kind of talked during the governor debate when Tracy and Jamie and Christy were doing that, and I mentioned it then that it's like, at least in this one, or in that one, Jamie and Christy were going back and forth at each other, and Tracy didn't get to, nobody took any jabs at her, which, whatever. But Dusty's only got one opponent right now, so it's going to be pretty interesting because, he doesn't have a Democrat to sit and take jabs at and be able to pivot and be like, oh, he's a Biden supporter.
Yeah, it'll be a good one, I think. Yeah, I agree. We were talking about that earlier. And, when you haven't already been elected to office, it's kind of hard to go after your record too much. But when you are the incumbent, we can look at your record and see what you've done. I don't know. Johnson, to me, has always just been kind of a middle of the road. Nothing fancy about the guy. Nothing gets me excited about him. Agree with him on some things. There's some things I haven't, But I think Collin obviously represents more of a libertarian view for sure.
I think he's just more in touch with South Dakota.
South Dakota's obviously libertarian then.
Well, yeah.
We got 2 minutes. It's supposed to start in 2 minutes.
I was going to say, what's with all this commercials and stuff?
Well, it's supposed to be commercial free. It's supposed to be 1 full hour, no commercials. So maybe they're getting all their commercials in now.
Unlike last time where it was just like they were like live ahead of time. They're like, I really hate the studio.
Is this it then? I'll just add it to the stream. Here we go.
Yeah.
I like how they say businesses support South Dakota Public Broadcasting. Isn't this funded by theft organization? I thought. Let's get my jab at SDPB in early. Look at that guy. 8 o'clock. They're late.
Yeah, let's go.
Let's go. Don't forget to check out this government website.
Hold on. Oh, looks like we were just about there. No. I'd say I have mine going on over here too. Mine's a little bit ahead of you.
Get a new free Escalade with your Medicare service. Here you go.
Unmute it.
Always showing the Badlands, never the Flatlands.
There he is too. Yeah, mine's ahead of yours.
Hello and welcome to SDPB's 2022 U.S. House debate. I'm Jackie Hendry, tonight's moderator. We're broadcasting from the Leo P. Flynn Gallery in SDPB's Sioux Falls studio. And with me tonight are the two candidates for South Dakota's lone seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. Republican candidate and incumbent Dusty Johnson, welcome.
Thanks.
And Libertarian candidate Collin Duprel. Mr. Duprel, welcome.
Thank you.
Tonight's rules of engagement: each candidate is allowed a 1-minute opening statement. Each question is allowed a 90-second answer, a 60-second rebuttal from the other candidate, and a 30-second follow-up as needed. Questions have been curated by SDPB's team of journalists, and some have been submitted by our studio audience. We'll end with 2-minute closing statements from each candidate. We drew the order for opening statements before tonight's broadcast, and Congressman Johnson drew first. Congressman, you have 1 minute for your opening statement starting now.
Well, thank you to public broadcasting and thank you to Collin. The American people are rightfully frustrated. Inflation costs families $8,000 more a year. The border is in crisis, and violent crime is up in our cities. Now, I voted against the terrible policies that have made those things worse, but I know it's not enough just to say no. Real leaders solve problems. And so I've successfully advanced legislation in the House that has a real impact on South Dakotans. Legislation that deals with public safety, big tech, the supply chain, and American energy. You know, DC is not an easy place to get things done. And so South Dakota needs someone who has proven they can roll up their sleeves and get things done. I work hard, I do get things done, and I'm looking forward to tonight's conversation.
Mr. Duprel, now is time for your opening statement. 1 minute starts now.
Thank you, Jackie. My name is Collin Duprel, and I'm running for United States Congress. I am a rancher from outside of Sturgis, South Dakota, and for 5 generations, my family has been doing what is the agricultural backbone of our state. When I talk about agriculture and I talk about what's going to be in the Farm Bill, I know what those things mean because they affect me personally. I'm really glad that my opponent brought up inflation because right now, federal spending is out of control. We're over $31 trillion in debt, and we're on a train that I don't see is going to stop anytime soon. And my opponent, unfortunately, even as conservative as he is, has voted to increase that debt time and time again in his tenure as a congressman. When elected, I believe that we need to have somebody who's willing to say no. And I'm going to say no repeatedly when it comes to increased spending. We can't keep sending our money overseas, and we can't keep spending it frivolously. And if you give me your vote, I'm going to make sure that we reel in the federal government and all of its bloat.
We also drew the order for the first question. That goes to Mr. Duprel. Mr. Duprel, like many libertarian
Shots
candidates,
fired.
label yourself as a person, not a politician. You also call your opponent a career politician. However, you have not served in the state legislature or in any other statewide elected capacity. What experience makes you the best candidate for South Dakota's lone seat in the U.S. House of Representatives? 90 seconds.
Well, like I said, South Dakota's an ag state. We need somebody who's lived that life to be there. I've been on the prairie when it's 60 below and the wind is blowing at 60 miles an hour. I don't believe my opponent ever has. Now, some might think that that's not relevant to time in Congress, but I've talked to Dusty a little bit, and he says it can be pretty rough. I think we need somebody who's had that background to be there. I think when we write that farm bill, we need to write it from a place of knowledge and not a place of desk work. The second biggest place in our economy right now is tourism. I'm from outside of Sturgis, and we have the world's largest motorcycle rally. I've seen what needs to happen in South Dakota to bring tourists to our state. I've seen what needs to happen to stimulate that economy. And even though I've never served in public office, I actually think that that's my greatest strength because we have a lot of career politicians right now in DC. We have some of them for years and years and years. One of my biggest platform positions is term limits. And I would see to it that we roll these politicians out of DC as fast as we roll them in, because we need to make sure that we have representation from people that aren't separated from the people. When you spend a career in DC, you forget what it's like to be a South Dakotan. And I'm a real South Dakotan, and I'm proud of that.
Congressman Johnson, you have 60 seconds for your response.
Well, I would agree that private sector experience is important if you want to do a good job in Congress. 4 years ago, I was the co-owner of a firm in Mitchell, a consulting and engineering firm. that helped rural communities get better broadband. We did business in about 40 states, and I learned a lot from those experiences. I would also tell you I've been able to put that experience to work in Washington. A lot of my colleagues, they don't understand how much inflation can hurt families. They don't understand how much inflation can really hurt businesses. And so I've made it one of my guiding goals to go out there and explain to my colleagues what is life like in rural America. You know that out of 435 members of the House, there are only 38 that represent districts that are mostly rural by population. I understand rural development. I understand the private sector. I understand being a husband and a father. And I do think those things serve me well in Washington.
We'll move on to our second question for Congressman Johnson. Congressman, you're a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, a bipartisan group of representatives working to find common ground to address key problems. In the 5 years since the establishment of this group, what are you most proud of, and what do you think South Dakotans can learn from that experience?
Well, we have a victory most every month. I think the big one from last month was funding the police. I mean, you've got this ridiculous defund the police movement, which we know does not keep our communities safe. And so you had folks, Republicans and Democrats in the Problem Solvers Caucus, come together to fund the police. And I played a lead role in making sure that that bill called out specifically our Native American tribes, that they were eligible for those dollars. The bill does a great job of making sure that small, rural, and tribal police departments have the resources they need to keep us safe. We need to fund the police, not de-police.
Mr. Duprel, you have 60 seconds. Talk about your ability to work across the aisle.
Well, I think being a third-party candidate, that really benefits me in this case. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I am a Libertarian. And that means that when I go to DC, I'm going to be in the power position because both main parties are going to want to work with me, and they're going to want to get my vote. And the reality is I'm not going to get marching orders from the minority leader or the majority leader. I'm going to make a vote for South Dakota every time. And when it comes to bipartisanship, I'm forced to be in part of it because if elected, it'll be tripartisanship instead. You know, and I'm glad that my opponent brought up investing in policing because it is really important to make sure we have law enforcement. But recently, he voted against a method of community policing, which would have made sure that we have social workers available via a grant program to deal with people with mental health issues. And if you want to look at decreasing the amount of violence in our communities, we need to make sure that we're reaching out to those people with mental health issues and funding that as well.
Congressman, I'll give you 30 seconds to respond.
Here's why it is so important that people take the time to read these bills. And I know there are a number of my colleagues that can't be bothered to do it, but you know what? I do it. Because the bill that Collin is talking about says that the social workers have to be sent in lieu of police. Now, listen, of course, there is a time and place for social workers to be in our communities working with the police to help people who are in crisis. But when you start talking about funding a program that would send social workers in lieu of cops and claw back the money if arrest rates didn't go down, you are not keeping our communities safe.
That's time. Our third question, again for Congressman Johnson. The U.S. Air Force Academy says the success of military operations is, quote, influenced not only by strategy and strength, but also the ability to adapt and build a cohesive team. Representative, you sent a letter to President Joe Biden calling the Academy's diversity and inclusion training, quote, offensive and a tremendous distraction. The training in question included suggestions on gender-neutral terms for family and romantic relationships. Congressman, what kind of diversity and inclusion training might you support in the nation's military academies?
I'd say this, of course, we want to treat everybody with respect. And we know that our war fighters will be better if we draw from if we make sure that there are women there, that there are men there, that there are rural people, there are urban people, tall people, short people. Of course, diversity can be a strength of the United States Armed Forces. But the Academy went too far here. And I think it is important that we call them out. They actually told cadets that they should avoid using words like mother or father because they could offend people. Now, the Air Force has tried to walk this back, but I have seen the slide deck. In plain black and white on those slides, it says cadets should avoid using terms like mother and father. That's not all it said, but I think that's one of the many egregious examples. And listen, this is an incredible country. We've got diversity. It is a strength of ours, but you can take this stuff way too far.
Mr. Duprel, 60 seconds on diversity and inclusion training in the armed forces.
We're built on diversity. Diversity is important for this nation. It's important for innovation. It's important for everything. I don't think I want to second guess decisions made by the military as much as possible. And that being said, I do agree with my opponent that avoiding terms like mother and father is beyond the realm of common sense. However, I don't think that we need to throw out the book on when we talk about diversity and inclusion. I think we just need to edit that book, and we need to make it a little bit more grounded in common sense.
We'll move on to our next topic of the night, abortion. This question is for Mr. Duprel.
Woo!
An unprecedented number of abortion-related questions are on the ballot this year across the nation. For example, voters in Kansas rejected a proposed amendment that would have said there was no right to abortion in the state. U.S. Senator John Thune has said he would support a bill to create a federal ban on abortions at 15 weeks. Would you support such a ban?
No, I wouldn't. The whole reason I'm running is to give South Dakotans a choice. And this is an issue of deep personal issue for me. I myself, I've often said, I'm pro-life. However, I do not believe that my morality ought to determine the reality of other people. And the reality is, in South Dakota right now, when the trigger laws passed, we took away the rights of mothers and we gave them to other people, even the people that might attack her. When I'm elected, I'm going to make sure that those mothers maintain those rights. And I'm not going to back down, and I'm not going to pish-posh around the issue. I don't think that anybody likes abortion. I certainly don't. And I think that if we want to prevent the most abortions, we need to prevent unwanted pregnancies. My opponent, he's voted against making sure that doctors have the ability to educate their patients about birth control. He's voted against making sure that they have access to that birth control. And I think this is a really conservative principle for us to make sure that women have access to those systems if they are going to want to keep them from having abortions. I say all the time that I'm pro-choice because I'm pro-life. I think that when abortion is legal and it's regulated, we can make sure that women have access to adoption agencies and they have access to financial resources. And if it's illegal, they won't have access to those different facilities. If she wants an abortion, she's going to get one. We don't have to like it, but we have to accept that that's the truth.
Congressman, 60 seconds on a possible federal ban on abortions at 15 weeks.
Well, I'm unapologetically pro-life. I think that that is a life in the womb, and I think it's worthy of protection. And listen, that's the approach that we take to life anytime it's out of the womb. And to me, the location just does not change the way we should view this critically important issue. Now, I do understand this is a complex and a controversial topic. I think we're going to get to decide it here in South Dakota. There are a lot of legislative ideas floating around in DC, like the one you mentioned. Some of them I'll vote for, but I don't think any of them are going to have the 60 votes in the Senate needed to turn it into a law. That means that the power will come back to South Dakota and that we're going to have an opportunity sooner rather than later to vote on this. And when that happens, I will be voting pro-life.
30 seconds, Mr. Duprel.
Well, I'm glad that we have both kind of drawn our line in the sand because this is going to let the South Dakota voters decide. They decided in 2006 and 2008 that they were going to keep it legal. And that's what I'm going to do too. And my opponent has mentioned that it's not going anywhere because this bill of Lindsey Graham's isn't going to go anywhere. But he's also said that he's going to vote pro-life. That means that at the congressional level, he's going to try to make it go somewhere. And that way is going to be the way of a ban.
We have to move on to our next topic of the night, inflation. This question's for Congressman Johnson. Inflation is the #1 issue for many voters this election, and of course, South Dakotans are also spending more but getting less. While we've heard a lot from lawmakers who are casting blame for the problem, we have heard very few concrete solutions. If reelected, what actions would you pursue to ease inflation?
Oh, I've got all kinds of concrete solutions. I mean, clearly inflation is a serious, serious problem. And we know that federal spending has made it worse. That's why I voted against all of the terrible trillion-dollar social spending packages that have been proposed by this administration. So the first step is we have to quit looking like the best solution for every problem is just a bigger sack of cash from Washington, D.C. We can't afford this. You know, the student loan bailout alone is costing $2,000 for every American taxpayer. So number one, we need to stop the spending. Number two, we need to bring down the price of energy. And I have been a leader in this. Just a few weeks ago, I was the lead Republican in a successful effort to pass a bill out of the House that would put an extra 8 billion gallons a year of homegrown American fuel into the supply chain. bringing down energy prices absolutely will help. And then finally, we have a workforce problem in this country. It is a crisis. Fewer workers means they make fewer goods. Those
So let
scarce
some people
goods
across the
go up in
border in.
price. It makes inflation worse.
Yeah.
We have 3 million fewer full-time workers in this country than we did just 3 years ago. We need to get people off the sidelines. And I've got legislation that would make it clear that if you're on government programs, if you're able-bodied, no dependents at home, and a young person, we have got to have you work.
Mr. Duprel, 60 seconds. How would you pursue an ease to the inflation problem?
The inflation problem is pretty simply solved. The biggest one is that we spend too much. We spend too much on things we don't need to. That's why, unlike my opponent, I don't support sending billions and billions of dollars overseas to Ukraine to fund a war that doesn't involve us. When Americans right now can barely struggle to pay their rent, and a lot of them can't even put groceries on the table, we're more worried about what's happening beyond our waters. So to begin with, I would limit the end of financial foreign aid pretty easily across the table, just because it's no longer America's responsibility to pay for the rest of the world. He brings up a lot about how he's voted no and about how he's opposed spending bills. But the reality is, in his time as our congressman, he's voted to spend more money than both of his predecessors, Kristi Noem and Stephanie Herseth-Sandlin, did together. And that's something that we simply can no longer afford.
Congressman Johnson, I'll give you 30 seconds for that.
Well, I would tell you that in the early days of COVID, you did see Republicans and Democrats come together to do things like the Paycheck Protection Program that did keep
Oh yeah, I did
on
do
the
that.
payroll connected to their employer. And so I have opposed the $1 trillion spending packages the last few years, but early on, these packages were bipartisan. The CARES Act passed 97-0 out of the United States. Now, maybe Collin would have been the only no vote, but the reality is when you're dealing with a global pandemic, it's always easy to criticize after the fact, but I think real leadership sometimes is being willing to take a chance.
He said
Next topic
Senate,
is
and it's
agriculture.
freaking
This
U.S.
question is
House.
for Congressman Johnson. A major challenge in regulating the livestock industry is balancing the needs of producers with those with the meatpacking industry. Many farmers and ranchers say they're getting the short end of the deal because of the power wielded by a small number of meat processors. Congressman, you introduced the Butcher Block Act to spur investment in the meatpacking industry. Do you believe more needs to be done to balance the scales between producers and processors? And if so, what are the next steps?
The producers who are frustrated are absolutely right. It's not a fair playing field. And that's why I have successfully passed out of the House so many bills that address this issue. You mentioned the Butcher Block Act. You're right, that is going to add tremendous new capacity outside of the big four packers. That competition is going to be good for producers and for consumers. But that's not the only thing we're working on. My cattle contract library has also passed out of the House. That would force the packers to provide unprecedented transparency into what they pay for cattle, not just if it's at the sale barn, but if it's in the alternative marketing agreements as well, with additional transparency, additional competition, and frankly, doing a much better job of labeling. This product of the USA business, listen, it was a mess under Trump. It's a mess under Biden. You're seeing a lot of bipartisan pressure on the administration to get that right. And if we can do those things, then we are absolutely going to give our producers a better opportunity to make a fair living.
Mr. Duprel, 60 seconds on balancing the needs of producers and processors.
Well, I think the first thing we need to remember is that when we talk about beef and we're talking about producers, we're not actually talking about beef anymore. We're talking about cattle. The cattle industry is significantly different than the beef industry. When Congress often talks about promoting the beef industry, they're talking about those meat packers. They're talking about those 4 companies that control more than 80% of the beef market. Right now, the way it is, those packers, when the price is high on cattle, they buy foreign beef or they use up their own stock. And then when prices are low, they pull producers clean. We need to strengthen those antitrust laws, and we need to make sure that those meat packers are held accountable, because right now they control so much of the market. Competition isn't even a reality. And the reality is, producers have been saying the same thing for the better part of 20 years. Mandatory country of origin labeling needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. It's something that I'll fight for, because in the past, every labeling act that has came out has said that you can ship beef to Louisiana and cut it up there and slap product of the USA right on the side of it. And when you got to read product of China on your shirt, you should be able to read it on your dinner as well.
God, I'm so happy.
I would just note that absolutely, Consumers deserve to know where their beef comes from. They need to know where that cattle was raised. The product of the USA label, as I said, that whole regime is just a joke. We either need to fix it or get rid of it, because at this point, I think it's giving consumers the wrong idea. I'm dedicated to getting that done.
Our next question is for Mr. Duprel.
He basically just piggybacked
While all
off of
Americans
him.
have felt the pinch from inflation, farmers are feeling it from many angles, considering inputs like fuel, fertilizer, and seed. And it's eating into the gains they've made from higher crop prices. If elected, what steps would you take to ease inflation pressure on the state's biggest industry?
Well, to begin with, a lot of it comes back to taxes. Everybody's taxed quite a bit when it comes to agriculture, and it's a common quote that the farmer is the only guy who buys everything retail, sells everything wholesale, and then he pays the freight both ways. And that's the reality right now for American producers. When we talk about farming, a lot of people will tell you, well, if you want to be a successful farmer, you've got to farm for the government, because that's the massive subsidies that enter this state do. They pay for people to farm with the government. We need to open up the industry. We need to have less government intrusion. We need to let these farmers still be able to grow the products they want, but be able to enter them into a market that's going to be more competitive.
Congressman, 60 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, we need to reduce the price of energy. Energy is a major input into agriculture. I've talked before about my efforts to reduce energy. We need to do even more of that. Also, fertilizer. You know, we do import some fertilizer when our domestic demand outstrips our ability to produce it. Sometimes we don't have the natural minerals needed to produce some types of fertilizer. We have tariffs that we're slapping on that product coming in. We should reduce those tariffs so we can give the farmers a bit of a break. And then, frankly, we have got to address the supply chain. My bill, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, did a lot. It has eased problems, but we are 80,000 truck drivers short in this country. More regulations from this federal government seemingly every month that make it harder to drive truck. We also need to make sure that the railroads are doing a better job hauling products that farmers need in and hauling their products back out.
We'll move on to our next question related to election integrity. This is for Congressman Johnson. According to an analysis from the Washington Post, a majority of Republican nominees on the ballot this November for the House, Senate, and key statewide offices have either denied or questioned the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. If you win this election, what is your role in debunking false claims of election fraud within the membership of the U.S. House?
Well, I've had
That was
dozens
fast.
of meetings, online, in person, telephone town halls, talking about election integrity.
Sorry, I'm in the
reality is
liquor
I
store
voted
parking
to
lot.
certify the 2020 presidential election results. Listen, was everything perfect? No. I mean, no election we ever have is perfect. Clearly, we need to do some things to increase election integrity. But there has been no evidence of the kind of widespread fraud that would have been necessary to overturn the results. And I have said that perhaps 1,000 times. And I think that kind of communication, that kind of education that I've been engaged in can make a difference. But I would also say we need to be honest about the areas where we have to improve. There were states that changed their rules midstream in the last election. I think they did their voters and election integrity a disservice. I also know that 28 states have made changes over the course of the last 2 years to improve how they run their elections. Most of those changes have been really good. Frankly, they have made those states a lot more like South Dakota. South Dakota's got great elections. We don't allow ballot harvesting. We don't let ballots come in a week or two after election night. And we make sure that you got a photo ID before you vote. Those are the kind of things that I think a good member of the House, can continue to educate people on the importance of getting it done.
Mr. Duprel, 60 seconds on debunking claims of election fraud among U.S. House members.
Well, the reality is I, like my opponent, have looked at a lot of the information, and there was over 80 different legal challenges across the country questioning the validity of the election, and not one of them ever brought up anything equitable. That being said, my opponent had a responsibility to his constituents, a large amount of them, and I don't think that he fulfilled it when he didn't assure them that the election was safe and secure. A congressman has a duty to their people to make sure that those people feel like their opinions are valid. And I say to everybody in South Dakota, your opinions are always going to be valid to me. And if there's ever a question like this again, I'll use the complete resources of my office to investigate it and to reassure all the voters that everything that happened was kosher. Now, I would point out that as Congress, our actions are pretty limited because per the Constitution, states have the ability to regulate and to decide how their elections take place. And I think that in South Dakota, we do a pretty good job of it. But I would encourage other states to make sure that everything is a little bit more transparent in the future.
Congressman, I give you 30 seconds.
So I would just say this to Collin. You know, last year, I was the Republican who received an award from a national group for being the most accessible, the most transparent. And one of the things they mentioned when they gave me that award was that I had done more than 50 town hall meetings. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know that I have had a town hall in the last 2 years where this topic, election integrity, didn't come up. I've talked about it week in and week out since the 2020 election. And I think it's important for the viewers to understand that.
Our next topic is border security. Congressman Johnson, this question's for you. You've suggested re-implementing the Remain in Mexico policy as a means to improve security at the border. Of course, critics of this policy say it forces vulnerable people to wait in potentially unsafe circumstances. How would you balance strengthening border security while also upholding the human rights of those seeking asylum in the U.S.?
Well, let's start with acknowledging the obvious, and that is that 2 million people illegally entering our country via the southern border every year is not a good policy. It is not humane. That traffic is controlled by the Mexican drug cartels to a greater degree than most people can even fathom. It is not humanitarian to allow these people to enter that way. And frankly, an unbelievable amount of drugs are entering that southern border as well. Just 2 days ago, I talked to Sheriff-elect Mueller in Rapid City. He told me that the number one most important thing Congress could do to keep our communities safe is to secure the border. This fentanyl and meth, it is coming over every single day.
I think he mispronounced and
so
the drug
yes,
war.
I am a supporter of Remain in Mexico because we know it works. When President Trump implemented that policy, illegal border crossings fell 85% in 6 weeks.
Doubt it.
85% in 6 weeks. And people were not required to wait in dangerous situations. They were able to wait in Mexico in humanitarian camps while we worked through the backlog of their asylum claims. I'm on a bill that would put back into place Remain in Mexico because it is so much safer, so much more, more humanitarian focused, and so much more common sense than the terrible policies that this administration has advanced.
Mr. Duprel, 60 seconds on the Remain in Mexico policy.
Well, I agree with Congressman Johnson, and illegal immigration is dangerous, not just to the country, but it's dangerous to the people making the journey. That being said, my policy would be a new kind of Ellis Island policy, which would expedite the process for which immigrants are able to come here legally. They can come here legally and they become taxpayers. Those taxpayers can contribute to society. Those taxpayers can take part in the country they're coming to. Because right now, when illegal immigrants come here, they're often subject to different things that are pretty close to slave labor. They're paid next to nothing to perform the jobs that a lot of people don't want to do. And when we allow that to continue happening, we're allowing those crimes against humanity that a lot of them are fleeing. Now, like I said, I think the easy solution is to make our legal immigration easier while increasing border security even more. We can't allow people to cross the southern border out in the dark. We need to have that door open for them so they can come in, sit down, we can read their name and find out if they can come in or not.
Congressman, 30 seconds.
Well, it is entirely too easy to get to this country illegally and entirely too hard to get here legally. I don't think most people understand the size of the drug carnage, though. 77% of teen drug overdose deaths in this country come because of fentanyl. Sheriff-elect Mueller told me that all of this violent crime that he sees in Rapid City is relatively easily traced back to the Mexican drug cartels and that traffic at the southern border.
We'll continue with a theme on the drug crisis in the United States. Mr. Duprel, this question's for you. The CDC reports more than 250 Americans die every day from a drug overdose. The latest provisional data shows 75% of those deaths involved at least one opioid. How would you work to address the rising drug addiction crisis in America?
When you talk about opioids, what people need to realize is these opioids that people are overdosing aren't street-made drugs. They're legal pharmaceuticals. They're pharmaceuticals that were prescribed to somebody who sold them to somebody else, or they abused them themselves. Big Pharma has been the culprit in one of our biggest drug crises in our country. And that's why I think it's so important that at a national level, we decriminalize marijuana. I'm not saying legalize it. I'm saying let the states decide if it should be legal. But we need to deschedule it. It shouldn't be on the same caliber as methamphetamine, because a lot of people will be able to use cannabis to deal with the same problems that opioids currently treat. And they're not going to have the same tendencies that come with opioid abuse either.
Congressman, 60 seconds.
If we really want to fix the drug problem in this country, we need to secure the border, one. Number two, if you are a dealer, we need to catch you and we need to put you in prison. But number three, if you're a user, we want to make sure that treatment is a part of your journey. Now, anybody can talk on this, but I have actually advanced proposals working with Democrat Kim Schreier from Washington a year ago, more than a year ago. She and I put forth a bill that would have allowed states to sweep up their share of the then $1 trillion of unused COVID funds. They could have created a permanent trust fund to deal with behavioral health. We're in crisis in this country. They couldn't have touched the principal, but they could have used the $40 billion a year of interest to transform how we deal with addiction and depression and violence in this country. It was an incredible idea, but even though we were working in a bipartisan fashion, we just could not get Speaker Pelosi to put that bill on the floor.
Mr. Duprel, I'll give you 30 more seconds on working to address the addiction crisis.
Addiction is a disease. It's a disease brought about by a bad choice, but it is a disease. And treating it like a disease is the only way we make it get better. When a lot of these different substances are something that is looked down in society, users don't want to go to seek treatment. They're worried about retribution. They're worried about what those things might mean. And again, with the decriminalization of marijuana, a lot of people are put into the system today for that one drug, and that's where they get access to the ones that are much more worse.
Our next topic, we expand to healthcare. This question's for Congressman Johnson. Earlier this year, the U.S. Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs blocked an asset and infrastructure report by the Department of Veterans Affairs. The report was required as part of a law passed by Congress in 2018 and was intended to modernize and improve the quality of the healthcare that the VA provides. As the pressure to address veteran health grows, how should Congress improve the healthcare provided by the VA?
Well, first off, we've made commitments to our veterans and we need to own up to them. You know, and listen, with regard to that committee that was going to, move different assets of the VA around, I understand. The VA of the future is not going to look like the VA of the past. But those recommendations were based on terrible data. I'll give you just one example. They said that the demand for mental health services, inpatient, West River for veterans, was going to go down over the next 20 years. There is not anybody who deals with veterans in any real, meaningful way who believes that that could possibly be true over the course of the next 20 years. And so their recommendations were to close inpatient services in Hot Springs and in Fort Meade, to completely shut down the clinic in Wagner. That is not the way that we're going to increase healthcare outcomes for our veterans. Listen, it is going to cost some money to get this right, but we have made these commitments to people who have served. When they have a service-connected disability, that has got to be on Uncle Sam.
Mr. Duprel, 60 seconds. How should Congress improve the health care provided by the VA?
Well, I think it's easy. When healthcare proposals are put forward to Congress, you pass them. My opponent voted against the PACT Act. This is something that I've heard no shortage of commentary from veterans around the state. They are all damaged in their lungs from burn pits in Iraq, from gas in Vietnam, and he voted against that the same week he was traveling the state putting badges on people's chests. When veterans call out for help, like so many of them did with the PACT Act, we need to answer, because I agree with Congressman Johnson. We have a responsibility to take care of those veterans. It was a pretty simple agreement. You sign this dotted line in the service of your country, and this country will take care of you. And we have been dismal in our upholdance of that agreement.
Congressman, 30 seconds.
Well, let's be clear. I am dedicated to the idea that anybody who has a service-connected disability related to burn pits should be covered by the VA. And I am on bills that would do just that. But the bill that Collin is talking about didn't just do that. It was an unbelievable overreach. It would have covered healthcare issues that are not linked to burn pits. it would have cost more than the combined budgets of 7 different federal departments, their discretionary budgets. You're talking the Department of Ag, the Department of Interior, the Department of Energy, and 4 others. It was a massive amount of money that would not have gotten the job done.
The next question for Mr. Duprel. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, many states are facing a shortage of healthcare workers, especially in rural areas of this country. Some care providers must turn to travel nursing agencies to fill their staff, and these agencies are often more costly. What can Congress do to ensure rural healthcare facilities are fully staffed?
Well, I do think that this is one of those issues where we often look to somebody to provide an answer that they don't necessarily have the authority to do. When it comes to staffing hospitals, Congress is at the federal level. Hospitals are at the state level. I do think that we need to encourage hospitals to be more forgiving in terms of what they provide. A lot of our healthcare workers in the state of South Dakota, they quit their jobs or they threaten to because of the mandates about vaccinations. And they're healthcare workers, they understand what vaccines are for, and they're more equipped to make those decisions than I think the rest of them. And we need to let healthcare workers lead the way. When it comes to funding, we have a responsibility as a nation to make sure that the people seeking healthcare are able to find it. And I think leaving safety nets in place for those people who can't afford it right now is very important. And a lot of the time, those safety nets are the same safety nets that keep rural hospitals open, because people that live in rural places often don't have the same income as people that live in big cities.
Congressman, 60 seconds.
Well, I disagree with my opponent when he said there is just not a big role for the federal government here. The federal government has created a lot of this problem. Last week, I was at Bethany Home, a nursing home and assisted living facility here in Sioux Falls. I talked to a number of healthcare providers. They told me that their coworkers that have left nursing did so because they are worn out by 192 federal requirements related to COVID that are still in place, the unbelievable paperwork that means that nurses who want to be giving direct care are spending as much time with a stylus and with a pen as they are in actually helping people. We need to do a better job of rolling back those federal requirements. And I think there is a huge role for the new Republican Congress, which I think the House is going to be controlled by Republicans. And I think we're going to have a real opportunity to roll back those, frankly, long out-of-date COVID restrictions.
Mr. Duprel, I'll give you 30 seconds.
Well, I'm confused because I said that the federal government doesn't have a role in fixing healthcare, and my opponent says it does. But then he says that its role in fixing healthcare is getting out of healthcare. If the requirements by the feds are the reasons that healthcare is so screwed up, then I think that as a federal government, the best thing we can do is get out of the way and let these different healthcare providers start doing it. If we got to roll back all these different issues that we passed, then we're not the answer.
We'll move on to the Supreme Court. Congressman, this is for you. In response to a Democratic-led bill to expand the U.S. Supreme Court to 13 justices, you proposed a constitutional amendment to keep the 9 in an effort to limit partisan manipulation of the nation's highest court, though that proposal is currently stalled in committee. In your opinion, what is the role of Congress in maintaining the public's trust in the Supreme Court?
Well, of course, in Washington, D.C., we weaponize just everything. And the last thing we want is for the size of the Supreme Court to ping pong up and down on the basis of who won the most recent congressional election. We need to put into the Constitution the idea that there are 9 justices. Now, this is not some, idle threat. This is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House has advanced this idea that they want to add 4 more Supreme Court justices right now. It is a terrible idea. It will politicize the court to a degree that we have never seen before. You don't need to take my word for it. It's not just Republicans who want to keep the 9. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a true liberal, before she died, she said that packing the court would be a grievous mistake that would undermine public trust in the court. Stephen Breyer, also a liberal justice, he agrees that we should not pack the court. My constitutional amendment is a great idea. Listen, it is stalled now. Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to have anything to do with this because we're in an era right now in Washington, D.C., where people want to gain power however they can, even if that means packing the court. But whether Pelosi is for it or not, I'm going to continue to talk about keeping the 9 because, frankly, America deserves to have a Supreme Court that is not any more politicized than it already is.
Mr. Duprel, 60 seconds. What's the role of Congress in maintaining public trust in the Supreme Court?
Well, I think first off, it's important to recognize that if Supreme Court justices did their job just the way they were supposed to, it wouldn't be so controversial every time one was picked. The purpose of the Supreme Court is to interpret the Constitution as it is written and to decide whether or not those laws that come before them are constitutional. And the reality is, whether Republicans are in control or Democrats are in control, whoever currently has control of the court wants to keep it the way it is. However, I do agree with my opponent that we can't just keep increasing the size of the court every time somebody takes power that we don't like. And that's the path we're on right now. We need to make sure that the court stays the size it is, but I don't think that we necessarily need to fiddle with the Constitution to do it.
We'll move on to a question about climate change. Mr. Duprel, this one's for you. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Control warns of significant damage and risk to natural systems and man-made assets if we fail to cap global temperature change at 1.5 degrees Celsius. What role do you believe the federal government should play in combating climate change?
Climate change is real. I think we need to cut through it. It is real, but why it's happening, I think, is always the subject of debate. When we discuss climate change, we're always talking about green energy. We're talking about its competition with fossil fuels. I always tell everybody that when the buggy came out, the horse and cart industry didn't ask for help from the federal government because they didn't need it. The buggy was a better product. I think that if green energy is the future, green energy needs to figure out a product that is better and more efficient than what the fossil fuel industry currently has. When it comes to federal proposals, we need to remember that not everybody can afford that $65,000 electric car. They're looking for that $1,500 beater to get to work because the people that are often forcing them to buy that electric car in places like California in just about 10 years forget that their constituents don't have the same money as the people making those decisions. When elected to Congress, I'm going to make sure that the right people in our bureaucracy are no longer making decisions for the rest of us over what kind of car they drive or what kind of fossil fuel they use, but instead encouraging people in the green energy sector to make those innovations that they need to make a better product, because the better product is the way that we save this planet, not by forcing people to take one that they don't want.
Congressman Johnson,
really like
what
that
role do you
too.
believe the federal government plays in combating climate change? 60 seconds.
Well, we are not going to get a green energy future by mandating that everybody buy an expensive electric vehicle like California just did a couple weeks ago. The reality is there is a tremendous environmental success story that America needs to do a better job of telling. In the last few years, we have reduced our carbon footprint by more than the next 15 carbon-reducing countries combined. It is a remarkable degree of success, and it didn't come from this command and control mandate approach. You know, that's really where Europe has gone. And at the same time that we've reduced those emissions, Europe's emissions have gone up 2%. Their approach doesn't work. What we want to do is allow that private sector to innovate, to build better mousetraps, to figure out better ways to power this country. And I would tell you, when it comes to energy, I'm an all of the above guy. And I think this administration's focus on just one narrow lane is doing a real disservice to this environmental discussion.
Mr. Duprel, 30 seconds.
I'm glad that Congressman Johnson brought up what has happened overseas, because the reality is we can pass law after law and regulation after regulation here in the United States to try to save the planet. If the rest of the world does not follow suit, it's not going to matter. We can continue unplugging our lights and walking to work, but when China keeps pumping smog into the air, nothing's going to change. We need to use that power of the purse when it comes to the economy and it comes to trade deals to encourage China to take the same steps that we've already taken.
We'll move on now to one of our audience submitted questions. This is related to Native American affairs and is directed to Congressman Johnson. Congressman, what have you accomplished for the 75,000 Native Americans in this state during your time in Congress?
Well, I spent a lot of time in Indian country talking to leaders both in and out of tribal governments.
I don't know if you can say
and
that.
we've gotten a lot done together, particularly in the areas of tribal education and tribal roads. I was the floor manager for a bill that is going to allow a renaissance of native languages. Tribal roads, we've gotten additional new funding for that. But what I really want to focus on are our gains in tribal law enforcement. When I talk to tribal presidents and tribal chairmen, they're angry about crime in Indian country. And they're angry because they know that Native women are 10 times more likely to be murdered than white women. They know that meth are just destroying reservation communities. And so just a few weeks ago, I was the lead Republican on the successful effort to get the Invest to Protect Act passed out of the House. That bill has special resources available to small, rural, and tribal police departments. Now, the whole reason that language about tribal law enforcement is in the bill is because I drew a line that I would not support that bill unless we made sure that the law enforcement agencies in Indian country were eligible for those dollars. That is going to have a real impact in keeping communities in Indian country safe.
I don't know if you can say that, can you?
Mr. Duprel, 60 seconds. What would you hope to accomplish for the state's Native American population?
I spent a lot of time on the reservations this campaign. And when I go around the state, I ask people how much time they spent there. And the reality is most people say not very much. I danced in Powwow at Pine Ridge. I gave a speak at Cheyenne River. And I've done the best I can to include Indian country and what my policies would be going forward. I've made a commitment that when I'm elected, I'll make sure that there is a representative from the tribes on my permanent staff. And that's not going to change no matter what happens in the future. Law enforcement on the reservations is important, but the reality is the reservations, they need an overhaul. Crime is bad because the economy is bad. The economy is bad because there is no infrastructure. Everything on the reservations practically needs to be built from the ground up. And we've got a lot of work to do. In Pine Ridge, there's a lot of homes that people sleep in at night in the winter without heat. And they sleep in that home with about a dozen other people who also don't have their own place. When elected, I'm going to reform the BIA. And I'm going to give power at those different BIAs back to the tribes where they live.
Congressman Johnson, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm the lead Republican on a bill that we've just introduced that is going to overhaul some of the inner workings of the IHS because it is just an absolute embarrassment. Collin talks about having a dedicated staffer on Native American issues. We've got two, Amy in Rapid City, Sydney in DC. They have as a part of their portfolio these issues, but we don't stop there. We have the Ben Rifle internship that is a special opportunity available to somebody to come out and be an intern in our DC office if they care about tribal issues. This is a real priority for our team.
Our next question, also audience submitted, related to same-sex marriage, directed to Congressman Johnson. Congressman, you recently voted against a bill that would protect same-sex and interracial marriage, saying at the time you did not believe those are under threat. If a bill materialized restricting either of these rights came before you, how would you vote?
Gay marriage is the law of the land. And I know there are some people who are trying to raise concerns that might not be the case, but even in our conservative U.S. Supreme Court, 8 of the 9 justices make it clear that it is the law of the land. They are not looking to prohibit gay marriage in this country, and frankly, neither are most of the American people. Now, when Speaker Pelosi puts these social issue bills, when she jams them through the House, she does so with little notice, with little debate, and with little regard for religious freedom. There is a right way and a wrong way to address these issues, and unfortunately, every time the Speaker seems to choose the wrong way, and it makes it almost impossible to be able to build a bipartisan coalition around these ideas. I'm just going to give you an example. So we had a bill that came forth that would have protected people's access to contraception. Listen, I'm on other bills like that. But the reason that so many Republicans voted against the Speaker's version is that her version would have protected abortion pills. Now, maybe you think abortion pills should be legal, maybe you don't. But I think you have to acknowledge that a more narrow bill celebrating or making sure that people's access to contraception is protected would have garnered a lot more bipartisan support than that one-party approach.
Mr. Duprel, 60 seconds. How would you vote on a bill to restrict interracial or same-sex marriage?
I'd vote against it. I think that the right to people to marry whoever they want is an American right. That's the reality. We shouldn't dictate to people what they do with their private lives. And for the minute and 30 seconds my opponent had to address that question, he spent more than a minute of it talking about things unrelated to the question. I don't think I heard your response, Congressman Johnson. Would you vote to let people continue marrying who they love or not?
You know, Collin, listen, you've done a great job of acting like there are all these big differences between us. But the reality is that the Constitution already says in 2 different places that these things are the business of the states. And in fact, the full faith and credit provision of the Constitution says that if any state is honored, it has those gay marriages, that other state is honored, it has those gay marriages, that other state is honored, it has those gay marriages, that other state. Constitution, when Speaker Pelosi is going to put up these political show bills, I think she's got to understand that she's going to find it a lot harder to get Republican support for those.
We have time for just one more question, very briefly in 30 seconds, starting with Mr. Duprel. Where do you stand on student loan forgiveness? 30 seconds.
When I graduated, I didn't graduate, excuse me, but when I got my first bill for my student loans, when the interest was being calculated, I decided it was time to pay it. I understand the frustrations that a lot of people had when they saw student loans forgiven to somebody else, but this isn't a top priority for me. I see reckless spending at the government level for a lot of things a lot more heinous than paying back people's student loans.
Congressman, 30 seconds.
I think this $400 billion giveaway is terrible policy. Yeah, I understand. We want college to be affordable and that we want to help struggling Americans. The president's approach does neither. 70% of the value of this giveaway goes to the richest half of Americans. And if you think college is expensive now, you wait until schools price in the idea that students don't think they have to pay it back anymore. More is going to be charged, more is going to be borrowed, and the problem is going to get worse. And we should all care about a $500 billion giveaway.
It's time for our closing statements of the evening. That order was also drawn before the beginning of the broadcast. Mr. Duprel, you go first. 2 minutes for your closing statement.
Thank you. And I'm glad that I got that closing statement right after that question, because it does give me an opportunity to go into a little more detail. The United States should not be a bank. It should not be a loan service. It shouldn't be something that students are ramrodded into getting a loan that's often very predatory as soon as they graduate high school. That was the whole reason for this program. That was the whole reason that the student loan forgiveness was even talked about. It was because the loans that the United States government proposes to students are frankly predatory, and that's the reality. Now, moving forward, I've said before at the beginning that I'm a South Dakotan and I'm somebody that understands South Dakota values. I'm someone that is going to make sure that I stand up for the rights of the little guy. I'm going to stand up for women. I'm going to stand up for gun rights. And my opponent on different times, he's done neither of those things. When approached at a town hall, when a woman was giving him her abortion story, he told her that her story was simply political theater. My opponent on several different times has voted for red flag laws, which take away people's right to own a firearm. I don't think that either one of these things are conservative values, and they're conservative values that I'm going to make sure that I adhere to when I go to Congress. I'm going to make sure that Native sovereignty is upheld, because our reservations know how best to govern themselves, and we shouldn't encroach on their borders any more than we already have in the past. I'm going to fight against eminent domain so that the pumped storage project in Gregory doesn't get rammed down the throats of landowners. The same way with the CO2 pipeline that is happening in East River, South Dakota. Landowners want to protect their land, and I'm going to be there to stand up for them. I'm going to make sure that individual liberties are always my guiding light when it comes to new legislation in Congress. My other guiding light is going to be, how much does this cost? Because today we're over $31 trillion in federal debt, and eventually the other shoe is going to drop. And we're going to have spent way too much money that people are going to literally burn it in the streets because the American dollar has lost all of its value. And protecting that American dollar and protecting American families is what I want to do for South Dakotans.
Congressman Johnson, 2 minutes, your closing statements.
Well, first, I would thank public broadcasting and Collin. Secondly, I would thank South Dakota. For 4 years, you have shown me, my wife, and our 3 sons kindness and respect. We live in Mitchell, but we travel across the state all the time. And from corner to corner, you have supported us. And in an era of hyperpolarization, that means a lot. Thank you. Now, politicians can all claim that they'll get things done, but how do you really know? I suppose with an untested candidate, you just have to take their word for it. Now, with me, you don't need to guess, and you don't need to take my word for it. I have a proven track record of getting things done, even in an environment where it's almost impossible to do that. To combat inflation, I've led the charge in passing bills to unlock American energy and to strengthen the American supply chain. To combat the border crisis, I voted 24 times to invest in border security, including the wall. To combat crime, I led the charge just a few weeks ago to fund police departments, especially rural and tribal departments. And so I've gotten things done. I've passed legislation. I've delivered for South Dakota. It hasn't always been easy to do that, but I've done it. And with your help, I'm going to continue to try to make a difference. I think in January, there is going to be new leadership in the House, thank goodness. And I think we're going to have a chance to move this country in the right direction. I'm asking for your vote so I can be a part of that and so that I can keep making a difference. Thank you and good night.
That concludes our 2022 U.S. House debate. I want to say thank you once again to both of our candidates for participating. You can listen to a rebroadcast on Fridays in the moment on SDPB Radio starting at noon Central, 11 Mountain, and again at 7 p.m. Central, 6 Mountain. And you can follow all of our election coverage at sdpb.org/election. On behalf of all of us at SDPB, thank you for watching. Good night.
Oh, shit. All right.
Well,
How'd you like that?
Wow.
You did
That
great.
was so good.
Yeah.
Dude. That was beautiful. That
Devin's
was a
like
work of
wiping away all
art,
his tears
dude.
right now.
I'm crying, man. Wow.
is that why you're hiding behind that sign, Devin? Because you're
Yeah.
crying.
He was emotional the whole time.
It's so good.
It's so pretty. It's so beautiful.
That's exactly what happened.
So what was any highlights? What was everyone's favorite part? I'll go first. I thought I liked the part where Dusty, where he basically called Dusty out for the government solutions thing, because Collin said government doesn't have a part to play, and then Dusty's like, well, government has a big part to play. Government caused all these problems, and it's like, yeah, okay, so now government's gonna solve all the problems they caused. I thought that was probably the best for me.
Dude, that was so epic, man.
There were some other good ones in there.
That was my favorite, and I missed a lot of it. So
You have to
I'm
rewatch
mad
it
that
from
you
the
took
beginning.
mine, but that was really good, and it was a nice flip. That was a nice flip. When they asked the question, they're like, "Whoa, what role do they have?" Blah blah blah. My first words were like, "They don't," and then that was what he said, and it's just so nice when you're watching something like that, and you want a person to say they don't, and then the person says they don't. It's so refreshing.
Yeah.
I really liked when he called Dusty out for not directly answering the question about gay marriage. That was
And he
about
did.
the only time I caught Dusty kind of sort of pivoting. Wasn't
And he
really
didn't-
a pivot.
He didn't
But-
really answer it again either.
Yeah.
He
No,
just started
didn't.
going to Constitution, law of the land. It's like, so you literally just can't say that you don't care if gay people get married. And what's up with the interracial marriage thing? Is this 1950?
I wasn't aware that
It's
that
a
was
thing
an
that's
issue.
been it's been talked about, believe it or not.
I mean, how do you even have that conversation without being a racist?
Well, here's the deal.
You don't.
I think it's worth.
You don't.
No.
Yeah.
I am all for you non-gingers trying to get involved in my group, okay? Like, all of you non-redheaded people are keep, like, marrying our women and stuff and, like, trying to, like, you're, like, just weeding out the hair color. Not a fan of it. So, I mean, if there was a bill for that, I'd be all about it. Like, gingers stick together, okay?
A ginger marrying another ginger is unnatural.
It's unnatural.
It's unnatural.
Whatever.
What else? What else?
libertarians' favorite thing is to point out when other people aren't being libertarian. Like, what were there a couple of points where you're like, oh, like that?
I thought he
was
could.
good, but like that wasn't libertarian. Was there anything like that?
No, I wouldn't say it was unlibertarian, but I would have liked to have seen a little more pushback on the whole drug war. The drugs are coming they're flooding in from the border. Just because I had a conversation with the Minnehaha or the Pennington County sheriff, it's like, come on. Then
elect, not even the actual sheriff.
I would fact check that ass when he's like, oh yeah, that Pennington County sheriff says that 90% of all crimes directly trace back to the border. It's like, are you kidding me? Like 90% of the crime in Rapid City traces back to the border. Like,
it's a pretty big journey to go and start causing crime. And the thing is, you can't blame meth on the border, because me and like 3 friends could each go to a store right now and like by tomorrow I could probably have meth, and I don't even know how to make it, but I'm sure between the internet and a couple of department stores I could make it. And yeah, I could probably blame it on Mexico, but it's the truth is anybody can freaking make it. So it's like you can't use the being like, well, it's the Mexicans. It's like, no, it's not.
Well, there was actually a study the other day. That same conversation came up about all the fentanyl allegedly coming through Mexico, and that's honestly not even true either. The fentanyl, a lot of it's just being sent through the mail, and a lot of it comes from China, and they actually said a lot of it comes through Canada as well. So to just blame it 100% on the southern border is a little ridiculous, but I thought his answers were good on that. I like the fact that he said it was, it should be addiction is a medical issue and should be treated as such. So those were good.
Yeah.
Good answers.
Yeah. Could have used a good hearty end to the drug war, but
it's one of those things where in his defense, or anyone really that is put in a debate, is that because you always get that rebuttal answer, and then it's just like, well, now you made me think of more responses, but now I don't get another chance to answer or add on to what you just said.
Yeah.
Trying to think of some other ones.
He was just super confident through the whole thing, and like,
yeah, he did good.
He came out swinging. Like I was, I was thinking he would, but it's just like he wasn't afraid to be like start calling him out on things, and honestly, I don't know if Dusty was prepared to have to actually go on the defense with any of it.
Yeah, Collin was slaying a dragon tonight.
Yeah, I don't think Dusty was ready for someone to call him.
I don't think so either.
Call him on his
with
BS.
The way he responded. Yeah.
Was there anything where, like, one of the things I loved watching when George did the debate a couple of years ago with Dusty was he would say something that would come even like less, I should say more libertarian, or more what a Republican would call like fiscally conservative, and you would see George kind of come on the farther right side of the other candidates. Is there anything like that where we're like comparing the two together? You really got this smaller government answer from Collin more than Dusty?
Yeah, Collin said he wouldn't have voted for all the 2020 COVID stuff after Dusty Johnson tried to come out saying that he was, doing his part to limit the debt. Then Collin just jabbed him hard, man, with the what did he say? Well, you've actually spent more money, or you voted for more expenditures than Herseth and Kristi Noem combined when they were House Representatives.
And the thing is, he didn't deny it either.
No, and then his response to that was,
Well, yeah, of course I had to.
I'm the guy that is like, we didn't even make that was a bipartisan bill. So I mean, like 98% of the Senate voted for that. Like everybody was doing that. So I jumped on that bandwagon too. You know, it's like, dude,
That's
he got him
awesome.
so good. He got him so good there. He was flustered, and he said like the dumbest rebuttal to Collins. Jag.
So there was one part in there where Dusty was calling out Collin. I think it might have been right after that, where Dusty was calling out Collin, saying, "Well, over all 70 Senate people in the Senate voted for this, so maybe Collin would have been the one that didn't vote for it." Yeah. But I just want to point out, like, this is a U.S. House race, and so it doesn't matter how many people in the Senate voted for it, and like you can tell like how many people in the House voted for it, not the Senate. Nobody cares about the Senate. Like, you were just trying to prove a point by saying, well, 70 people in the Senate. Okay, well, the House is always more split than the Senate, so it wasn't 100 or whatever people in the House. Can't remember how many people are actually in the House right now, but I just thought that was a little stupid. It was like, why are you talking about how many senators voted?
Yeah, that was epic.
Yeah.
I'm very proud to be Libertarian tonight.
Yeah, he did a really good job on really just about everything there. And I mean, I do, to be non-biased, I mean, I think there was a couple things that maybe Dusty Johnson had, I don't want to say upper hand on, but maybe had the better delivered answer on, like as far as like the healthcare worker situation, where I mean, both of them were correct on that question, or that thing where it's just like, yeah, a lot of people did quit because of vaccine mandates, but Dusty was right too that a lot of people quit because it's just like they're burnt out because they weren't getting any help. So it's a matter of like how you wanted, depending on like the viewer and the voter or whatever, how you want to interpret that, because like I said, they both had good points when it came to that. Oh, I mean, Ashley, you work in the healthcare industry. You've probably seen it yourself.
Yeah, I think it was a mixed bag between the two. I mean, we, at least here, we got to submit like an exception if you had a good reason. For example, like a religious reason to not get the vaccine, then they could approve that for you, and then you didn't have to do it. And I personally don't know anybody that quit because of that. It's mostly been burnout and issues with pay because of the fact that we're so short on people. Nursing ratios are up, meaning rather than having a nurse that can focus on 3 to 4 patients, that nurse has to take care of 6 patients, meaning the quality of care goes down. That nurse is way busier, way more things on her mind. So the system's a mess,
right?
To sum it up.
Well, and I think Collin even brought that up, that it goes beyond, or that's where he kind of nailed him with the whole like, well, you just said that you want to get the federal government out of it, but or because Collin says we need to get the federal government out of the way, and they don't have a responsibility or whatever. And Dusty's like, oh, the federal government has a huge responsibility, blah, blah, blah. We need to get the federal government out of it. And he's just like, well, wait a minute. Like, what did you just say? Like, do they or do they not need to be involved in it? Because you just basically admitted that it's because of the federal government that there's so many problems with it.
Yeah, that goes up big. Yeah. I guess I don't know, like Jesse Ventura, when he was running for governor of Minnesota, he was polling 10%, and he did one really great debate performance and ended up winning that election. Do you guys think this was at that level of a debate performance? Collin might
I'm convinced
slip
that
in there.
I'm convinced that
and break the curse.
if South Dakota had a chance to watch this tonight, I think his chance is very real.
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
I think it's a good shot, but he needs Republican votes. And so, that one issue is going to hurt a little bit. However, I mean, there are pro-choice Republicans. A lot of them probably are in the closet.
Or they're Herschel Walker and they're paying for abortions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy that was running against the Libertarian that's running in that race. Apparently, they had a debate the other night, but Herschel Walker didn't show up. So it was just him and that Democrat. And apparently, he did really well. I didn't watch the debate, but apparently, he did really well. So chalk up another Libertarian debate win, in my opinion.
oh yeah. Yeah. Dude, Dusty's probably walking around like his office, like cursing at his staff, or like, how come you guys didn't worry about this Collin guy, man? He's all over me tonight. God, man. Relentless, man. It's just constant machine gun fire out there.
It also kind of irritates me that there's only like one debate. All these races, it's like one debate. It's like, isn't that kind of a slap in the face of the voters? It's like, they deserve to hear more from people than just one freaking time,
Yeah.
This is such a state of like just vote for the person with the R next to their name, vote for the same guy that's been doing the same thing forever because he's a good old boy and he's a rancher. And guess what? Collin's a rancher. He has the hat.
Yeah.
He killed this debate. He got a bunch of chances to talk about how he's actually in quite a few ways more conservative than Dusty is. I think this is going to be really good for him.
You brought up the rancher, Collin being a rancher. I want to point out too, just because I didn't want to talk during the debate, but Dusty started mentioning how he was, blah, 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 owned a company that was bringing broadband to rural areas and stuff like that. And it's like, so you made your fortune relying on government contracts and sucking on the government teeth.
Yeah.
That's literally what that is, because the whole rural broadband project is literally just billions of dollars that the federal government's just doled out, not saying that people didn't need internet, but you look at something new like Starlink that it was built by the private sector. It didn't cost taxpayers billions of dollars. And they're still talking about rural broadband projects to this day. It's like rural broadband is a lost cause, and if it wasn't done by the tax, off the backs of the taxpayers, Anyway.
I love how Christina was like, winter's coming, South Dakota. Collin Duprel, he stands in negative 60-degree weather on his ranch, unlike that desk worker, Dusty Johnson.
Yeah. That was hilarious because Collin actually kind of.
We're ready for winter, baby.
He's like, he's like, you can't do any of that work from your desk. And it's like, nice.
Yeah.
I know Collin posted a picture like a year or two ago, like in the middle of winter, and he's outside and he's got a beard or whatever, and it's just completely covered in frost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't envy him being a rancher.
No. I'm only half a rancher. I've done some ranch activities out in the cold, and boy, it sucks. I'm glad it's not my full-time job. God bless those people.
I'm lucky. I grew up allergic to most farm animals. Like can't do horses. I'm actually allergic to like hay, dust, all that crap. Yeah.
So am I. My mom had to come pick me up from the stock show because I couldn't breathe. It was a field trip as like a first grader. But
Yeah, for sure. Like an
took my
enclosed barn.
Zyrtec and went to the branding the rest of my life. Gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah, I wouldn't have survived in the 1800s. I'd have died.
Same.
I
It's bloodline week.
I have to tell you a funny story. So earlier today, when I got home from work, our next door neighbors, it's this older couple, and they're just the sweetest couple. I mean, they're always buying my kids toys and candy and all this crap. You know, just the greatest neighbors you could have. Anyways, like I was talking to her when I got out of my car, and I had a flyer in the mail that I got from Christy Nome, obviously, because she keeps mailing flyers. And I was talking to my neighbor. I'm like, I am so tired of getting these frickin' things in the mail. And she's like, I am too. She's like, I am just so tired of both of those parties. And she's like, you know, I don't know anything about the Libertarians, but she's like, I'm gonna vote for them every time because that's how much I hate the other two guys. And she's like, I don't know who they are, but I'll keep voting for them. And she's like, I did vote for you, and I know you. You're a good guy. Yeah, I'm like,
So
they are too. And like I said, she's super sweet old lady, like big time Catholic and all that. But it's just like she hates Christy Nome.
Adam, it's funny you bring that up. I actually have my mail in front of me right now, and I got an Amendment D thing. Jamie Smith, Nome, Amendment D. 2 things about Helene Duhan. Like, chill.
They got money to burn.
My
I
thing
don't know
is,
who
like,
this person is. Another thing about Amendment D. Like, all of it. All of it.
I do feel, I don't want to say I feel bad, but the amount of crap that Christy Nome is sending about Jamie Smith is ridiculous because a lot of it isn't even true. Like, I've watched a lot of stuff on his campaign and stuff, you know. I mean, like I said, my wife's a Jamie Smith supporter or whatever, so, and obviously my votes with Tracy always will be, but he's no, but like she's taking pages out of the Trump book where it's just like she's making stuff up to like accuse him of, you know what I mean? I'm just like, how pathetic are you as a politician that like you fabricate stuff or like take huge reaches to, like, she's like, oh, he's an extremist because he marched with BLM. It's like, I don't think that makes you extremist. Like, if he was carrying a bomb or something, I'd be like, okay, that's pretty extreme. But I'd be like, no, he was like, hey, you know, Black Lives Matter, cool. It's like, that's not an extremist move. It's, you know, people from the Libertarian Party did the same thing. They marched in a lot of these things. They supported a lot of these causes. Once again, maybe not the organizations themselves, but the movements. So it's like, I don't know. She's trying to pander to a very bad crowd.
She's trying to pander to the Trump cultists.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's sad and scary at the same time.
Yeah, it's really scary.
Yeah.
How come nobody's calling us extremists? I'm a little offended.
Well, we don't know. We don't know what Dusty's response after tonight's going to be. He might start to get a little worried.
He might.
I decided to announce I've got some health issues. I'm not going to be able to participate in any future debates.
Dude, I was checking out his Twitter page the last couple days or whatever, and dude, he doesn't have any following whatsoever. Like, Christy Nome, I'll give her a little bit of credit. She posts a picture of doing something stupid, and it got 5,000 likes or something, right? Dusty Johnson, I was on his page, and he was like posting some pictures and stuff he was doing. It had like 50 likes. It's like, geez, that's like Hedgehog Watchdog status there.
We're better than Dusty Johnson.
So maybe it's an indication that maybe he's not as popular as one would think.
The thing is, he's one of those. How did I describe him in our group chat? Like, he's so, like, I don't know. He's not a noisemaker. Like, people know, like, the Ted Cruzes, the the Marco Rubios, the AOCs, the people that have names that are making moves, dumb ones, but people that are making moves in Congress and stuff. But I mean, even Thune has like a pretty big following for. I mean, he's a big wig in DC, but it's just like even Mike Rounds too. Same those Mike Rounds and Dusty Johnson are just like who's it's is like when it comes down to it. Like they, I don't feel like they have any pull or any name recognition.
I hate to body shame, but Dusty's literally the little guy.
Yeah, I feel like he's definitely got some mime experience. I feel like he's doing a lot of
Oh my
miming.
gosh.
Up
He took
there on
a
the
page out
stage.
of the Jamie Smith book.
Oh, the lean in. Thank you.
He sticks his head out too far. I noticed
I was
that.
gonna say, how weird is it that he looks like the young guy? He's probably like 20 years older than Collin, but like, who's this young buck we got here on stage? Oh, that's Dusty.
He's dipping into that fountain of youth. Yeah.
They're like, hey, little
Got some
fella, did you lose
Botox
your
or
parents? And he's like, "Oh, the congressman." Sure you are, buddy. Let's go find your mom.
Yeah.
You can be whatever you want to be.
I am from South Dakota. It's like South Dakota's not even a state, man.
Yeah. Is that right next to Narnia, little guy? Okay. Dave, call security. This guy lost his parents.
Ugh. Yeah, otherwise, props to Collin. I think he did pretty good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
My wife was messaging me too because like she was watching it and she's just like he came very well prepared for this.
Oh yeah, he researched hard, dude. Like he's not just going out handshaking; he's sitting there reading bills and all that jazz. He's getting educated.
Yeah, like I said, I think it put Dusty at a disadvantage because Dusty had to answer the questions as much as he could because, like Kristi Noem, right out the gate in her debate, pivoted immediately, no matter what, because she could pivot to like, well, I'm not going to answer your question. I'm just going to attack this guy because I know about him. Where it's just like, nobody knows about Collin yet, or at least they don't. So it's just like, what are you going to attack him on? You have nothing. Like you even admitted that, like at the end, they're just like, this guy's not experienced. It's just like, yeah, neither were you before you jumped in, you jerk.
Yeah, because he actually didn't hold public office. I think he might have at some point in his career, but prior to 2018 when he got elected, he was just some like working like the Secretary of State's office, or
he's the PUC. He used to be a Public Utilities Commissioner.
Really?
Yeah, I know that because I ran for Public Utilities Commissioner. So I just
you're basically an expert on everything PUC.
Yeah.
I know, but he might have been elected to something. But yeah, he was just I can't remember. He did something right before this, but he wasn't elected. Right,
yeah, he was. He was a Public Utilities Commissioner. You get elected at convention, and then he won the general election.
You need to calm down, dude. Like, we are sorry that we're like,
you just don't care about PUC news, related news, man. What's wrong with you guys?
Well, was it right before, or was it years
right before? Yeah. That was his PUC, and then he got elected to U.S. House.
Okay, dude. Like,
all right, well then, Dusty Johnson.
I'm flexing on this issue. I'm flexing hard.
I'm glad this is your show because if you were watching it and you're just like, give me the call-in number. I need
just
to
lost 4 viewers. Oh god.
Well, another good news: Collin did win our Hedgehog Watchdog election 2022 poll by what was it? Jeez, let me look that up real quick. He won by a landslide. It was like 70 or 80%.
Nice.
Hell yeah.
These are the results you can count on.
Yeah, these were really accurate polls, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So there was 26 votes.
Oh.
26 votes, but he got 76.9% of the vote. So there you go. And if those polls are to be trusted, IM27 is going to pass with 91% of the vote.
I am a little
Wow.
disappointed that Collin didn't do the finger guns like we kept telling him to do.
Yeah.
Like, my name is Collin Duprel. I'm from Vale.
Not a
And
single
he's like, I've been a
finger.
rancher all my life. People are like, what the hell did he just do? Did he do finger guns? Like, for every answer, no matter how serious it is, he's like, listen, I'm pro-life by in my own life. But I think that it's like,
I did like how he turned to Dusty a couple times and gave him the old stink eye.
yeah.
He's like, you!
I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds of my time to actually answer the question you didn't answer.
Yeah, he should have like moved his podium out of the way to stare him down. He's like, this podium is getting in my way.
They should have just faced him like this.
Like,
Yes.
stand in front
The
of
moderator's like here.
They should have had one of those like town hall debates. Like, you remember, like they do that with the presidential ones, where they're usually on stools, but then they walk around the room as they're talking.
I really liked that Donald Trump when he just kept
Standing in the
circling,
background.
circling Hillary and stuff.
I like that. I liked back in 2000 the Al Gore and George Bush one. Like, you can still find clips of it where they're doing that same thing. And George Bush is giving his answer, and Al Gore's like walking right up to him. George Bush turns and looks at him. He's like, just nods at him and keeps talking.
I think Saturday Night Live had a good skit about the Trump Hillary ones where he was like chasing her around. No, but good stuff. Once again, I thought Collin did good. Don't want to take away from his achievements by any means. And shit, if anything, I don't know. I know it's pretty hard to be optimistic when you're a libertarian, to be honest, but two-way race, he looked great in the debate. He's been campaigning hard, hitting a bunch of events, doing all the right things. I know the dollar per vote total is going to be amazing. Or the vote per dollar.
Well, I even went on Dakota War College's page, and they were talking about all the money each one's raising. I'm just like, man, Dusty Johnson's raising an awful lot of money to go against a guy that you guys claim isn't a threat ever. So, like, must be something to it then.
Yeah.
I always kind of thought it was funny when all these Republicans that are running in the primaries trying to beat the incumbents, they raise like six figures or so in a primary race. And then it's almost a given that they're going to lose. So it's like, wow, that's a lot of money. I don't know what Taffy Howard raised, but it was over $100,000 in her race against Dusty.
Yeah.
But yeah, his vote per dollar is going to definitely be good. Our previous U.S. House candidate got 19% of the vote, but he wasn't campaigning near as hard as Collin was.
Did they have a Democrat in that race?
No.
No.
I couldn't remember for sure.
No, but he also didn't get to debate either. They just did like interviews on Kelloland. I don't know why. That was all during COVID, so they were avoiding debates.
Oh, when Uriah, you're talking about. For some reason, I thought you were talking about George, and I'm just like...
No.
Yeah, Uriah did a good job for having to deal with trying to campaign during COVID and stuff.
Yeah, and he won 2 counties in South Dakota. So if you take those numbers and you think Collin's done 10 times the work, look good in the debate, I don't know, could be.
I think he's at least going to beat Uriah's number.
Oh, well,
sure.
Yeah.
Which is, something... For us, it's the little wins, man.
I would be.
So I'm looking forward to
I
that.
think he's getting 40s,
At least.
50s.
I was about to say, like,
Yeah.
if he doesn't win, I would be surprised if he doesn't reach 40%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know before the debate, I was kind of saying 30% is totally doable, just based on the amount of work he's been putting into the campaign. But shoot, after the debate, yeah, I mean, I think legitimately could be a close one.
Yeah.
So a couple weeks left. If you got money to donate to Collin for Congress, here, I'll put that in the chat. Give him some money. Maybe you can buy some ads real quick.
Yeah.
'cause, I mean, they're gonna be in a-
CollinForCongress.com.
They're going to be in a push now to, any last minute stuff they can do.
Well, any other highlights? Anything else you want to talk about his performance? Or
I'm just proud of him.
Yeah.
Man, that's my boy.
Yes. That's my boy, Blue. Or yellow, I guess.
no, yeah,
That's my boy. Like, yellow's a bad color, kind of, huh? Maybe we should be black.
it's
You
yeller.
should say gold.
Gold.
Yeah, there you go.
Gold.
That's my golden boy.
After tonight, hell yeah. Hell
Big
yeah.
golden pony
Yes.
boy.
But I don't have anything else. That was an awesome debate.
Yeah, it was
I
good.
looking
wish there
forward
were
to that
more to
all
look
week.
forward to.
You guys want to live stream the debate on Monday night for Tracy again?
Tracy's going again, right?
Hell yeah. Tracy's got a round 2 coming up.
I know she's gonna be in the parade at D-Days down in Vermilion on Saturday. But I was gonna ask her if she wanted to do another quick debate prep session if she wanted before then. I don't know. Because the one interesting thing about her debate on Monday is just going to be no Kristi Noem this time. It's just her and Jamie Smith. Now, my prediction is that Jamie Smith is going to spend most of his time talking about Kristi Noem, kind of like how they went back and forth. But Tracy's going to have more time to talk. It's not going to be this distraction where it's Noem versus Smith for an hour.
Yeah.
She's going to have an hour to kind of talk, and so I don't know. We'll see what she wants to do, but we could live stream that if you guys are interested. That would be fun.
Yeah.
I'm down.
Monday the 24th.
Anytime I get a chance to hang out with you good folks, I'm all about it.
Yeah.
Watching debates together is always more fun than just watching them on your own too.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, we'll see you all Monday then.
Thanks for having me, guys. This is fun.
Absolutely. Thank you, future Lieutenant Governor, for joining us.
Yeah, those that don't know, Ashley Strand, Lieutenant Governor, vote for her.
Or
November 4th. Oh, yeah, and only 4 days left to register to vote.
Yep.
Monday is the deadline, so you have to vote by Monday or have to register.
I was going to say, you don't have to vote by Monday. You have to register.
And register Libertarian.
Grab an absentee ballot while you're registering. Shit, vote the same
At the
day.
very least, abandon the other parties. I mean,
Vote early and vote often.
Yeah. I always like that one. Sounds good. See you guys Monday.